Bilali Mack is a Brooklyn-based visual effects supervisor, director, and the host of the Legends of VFX podcast. He's worked on commercials in TV and film, Adidas, Google, BMW, Stars, HBO, and Focus Features. Worked with directors such as Dave Meyers and the Russo brothers. He currently works for Alchemy X. In this episode, we're talking about his fast climb from flame artist to visual effects supervisor, the value of becoming the go-to guy for his creative partners, and his passion for socially diverse storytelling, and his mission to help authentic voices reach a broad audience. This episode was also recorded in video, so you can check it out on the postpostpodcast.com. And without further ado, I give you episode 31 of the Post Post Podcast. And hey, Bilali, how's it going?
How's it going? Hey, thanks for having me, dude.
Sure thing. And I can't not notice the red Coca-Cola behind you. Just kidding. I hope it's not a...
It's pretty bright. I can just move my head in front of it just a bit.
No, actually, it's not that bad. And is there a reason why there's a big Coca-Cola... Are you sponsored by Coca-Cola? I know you have...
I'm definitely not sponsored by Coca-Cola, but it looks like it right now. Funny story, I moved. Also, my dog is on the couch. I don't know if you
I didn't notice him. What's his name?
He's been sleeping there the whole time. He's listening, so...
That's cool.
The Coca-Cola, I actually just moved into this apartment recently, and this Coca-Cola sign was in the basement. Our landlord just left it in there, so we just brought it up, and I just thought it would be cool to just leave it in the office.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's the story of the Coca-Cola sign.
So it must have some ancient history that you're not even aware of.
Yeah, I'm not. It could be cursed.
Maybe. Who knows?
Let's hope that's not true.
Let's hope the history that you bestow upon it is more interesting than the history that that it carries with it. And you're in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah, so I'm in Brooklyn, New York. So I'm based out of Brooklyn. Visual effects company I work for right now is called Alchemy X. They're in Manhattan, but with COVID and everything, everyone's working remotely right now. So
got it. So you're a vendor side visual effects supervisor, and here I see your dog just heard we're talking about him, so he got up.
Yep.
Cute.
Yep, I'm a vendor side visual effects supervisor.
And so for people who don't know, I mean, I'll just kind of quickly say, as far as I understand it, vendor side visual effects supervisor, as opposed to a client side visual effects supervisor, is a person that is in charge of the work inside the studio. He interfaces with the client, but he's he's at the service of the studio. He protects the interests of the studio that is actually going to create visual effects, even though everybody's at the service of the story at the end of the day, and everybody wants to get the best job possible. But before going into what you're doing now, I'm kind of curious. Are you originally from New York, and how did you get into visual effects?
Yeah, so I'm not originally from New York. I'm not actually originally from the United States.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I was born in Ghana in West Africa. Moved from Ghana to Windsor, Connecticut, early 90s. Actually late 90s is when we moved to Connecticut. From there, I went to Boston, and for university, I went to Emerson College for computer animation and motion media, and from there to New York. So kind of my journey has been like Ghana to Connecticut, Connecticut to Boston, Boston, New York, and that's where I'm at now. And
so did you, when you went to school in Boston, did you already know that this is what you want to do with your, in your life, like to do digital?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been into filmmaking and storytelling, and I loved watching old like Disney movies, like any kid growing up. And I was really into like Walt Disney was like one of the guys I kind of looked up to. Mm-hmm. I got really into computer animation, and I took a bunch of filmmaking classes when I was in high school. I took like a TV production class, and then I did this like half day arts program where I was doing filmmaking classes there as well. And so I kind of felt like I wanted to get into filmmaking actually originally. I went to university, and when I applied, the filmmaking program at Emerson College was like really full. So they had moved me into, they had moved me or accidentally put me into the computer animation department.
Accidentally?
Yeah, well, not accident, but because there wasn't enough space is what my guess was, or that's what they told me. Even though I selected film production, and so I kind of just was like waiting for them to. I think after like 6 months or so, you could reapply or change majors.
Right.
So I had to change majors to get into a different kind of like department. But I did the computer animation course for like 6 months, and I actually really enjoyed it. And I was like, oh man, this is cool. All of my friends are actually having to go on set and like rent camera equipment and like carry stuff. And I was just like playing on a computer basically the whole time. And so I was like, man, if I could just get really good at making my own films in these computers, I won't have to like worry about any of this other real life practical issues that my filmmaking friends are running into.
That's funny. That's kind of how that's kind of my story as well. When I was young, because I started when I was like, maybe 14, but I didn't, for some reason, my mom was like not into getting me a video camera, or she didn't see the point in that. She always wanted me to get a real job. And that was kind of I didn't have a camera, but I had a computer, and I was like, well, I can make movies using the computer then.
So that was my whole idea as well. And so from that, I decided I would just stick it out and see how it played out. And I stayed that whole track for the entire program, graduated with a BFA. I did like a thesis animation, like 3D animation at the end of it. And then from there, I started at a place in Boston called Brickyard VFX, which is a commercial visual effects studio in Boston. Worked there for like 6 months, and then applied for a job at a visual effects studio in New York called Smoke and Mirrors.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I started, in the tape room, helping deliver commercials for clients and working at the studio.
What does that mean to start at the tape room? Is it
so the tape room, or a lot of people call it MCR, machine room operator, or machine room, MCR, a machine room operator. And so basically what that entailed was I was basically ingesting footage, ingesting tapes, dropping them onto the server, encoding deliverables for clients and postings, and also checking and QCing footage.
I see.
We when I first started, there weren't that many people at the company, so we were also doing things like setting up software for the artists. We became kind of like, I don't know, IT-ish,
right? Yeah,
like pipeline-ish, because we were like the young. Everybody else at the studio was older. They were older artists that were used to just, like not doing any of that kind of like uploading,
right? Yeah,
downloading software. So we were the young guys, and they'd be like, "Oh, can you guys figure out how to upload this new plugin on the server for us?" So we were figuring out how to do a lot of that kind of stuff. And so so I did that for like a year and a half.
Was that in 2012 or so, or?
That was like 2013.
2013, got it. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
That was like 2013. And did that for like a year and a half. Got promoted to junior flame artist. So at the time I was still helping, doing like rotoscoping and doing like paint work on the flame, which still is like advanced compositing and visual effects software.
Yeah, flame is like it's sort of like the Rolls Royce of like 3D softwares in a way.
Yeah,
visual effects software.
Yeah. It kind of still is. I mean, I hope. I've been working with Autodesk now for better part of this last year.
Autodesk is the creator of Flame.
Yeah, they also create Maya,
Right, and
3ds
Max.
Max, like all those other programs. But Flame is part of their media and entertainment suite.
Right.
Is what they call it. But yeah, Flame was what I got started on. Flame is kind of like that, the Rolls Royce of visual effects commercial software. People don't usually use it as much for film and TV. You usually use like Nuke for film and TV work, but I got into commercials. So I was learning how to roto and track and paint and do kind of all that support visual effects work in Flame. After a year or so doing that, I moved from junior Flame artist to Flame artist, started leading projects. I went on set, shadowed on set a couple times with our senior visual effects supervisor there. And then applied for a job at MPC in New York, got that job, and I became a Flame artist / on-set supervisor there.
Got it.
Yeah, and so I worked at MPC for 3 years, working on really awesome commercials, working with really talented visual effects artists and visual effects supervisors. That's really where I came into my own as an artist, I would say.
So MPC is short for Motion Pixel Company, right? And
Motion Picture Company.
Motion Picture Company.
Or no, sorry, Moving Picture Company.
Moving Picture Company. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So I worked in the commercials department, the feature film department in London and LA. They're the ones that do Lion King,
right?
Jungle Book. They do the big visual effects feature films that you.
So before that, I'm kind of curious. So this to me, it seems like it happened very quickly, like a year from junior to Flame to Flame artist, and then starting to supervise very shortly after that. Yeah. How do you explain, first of all, what is the average time that it usually takes? Do you know, or is it just, does it just sound
to move from you would say to move from artist to supervisor? Or
I guess I honestly, I guess both, from junior to artist, and then from artist to supervisor sometimes.
I think I'll put it this way. I think I was really lucky that generally you probably wouldn't move that quickly with opportunities like that. But I was really lucky. I think I probably honestly wouldn't have become a VFX supervisor until I don't know, maybe 3 years from now, where I'm at right now even.
Right.
I was lucky in the first, almost all of my jobs that they were small enough studios that had enough work that they were just give him a shot kind of thing.
Yeah.
Especially at Smoke and Mirrors, the first place I started at, I moved from working in the machine room to a full-on visual effects artist that was they would give a full commercial project to work on near the end. Because we halfway through, actually, we lost one of our visual effects, our Flame artists.
Oh.
And it's hard to find good visual effects Flame artists to lead projects and that are good with clients. And one of the things that is very valuable is if you're really good with clients. And I was really good with clients early on. And so what does
it mean to be good with clients? I'm curious for you.
Yeah. So being good with clients in visual effects for commercials is basically, if you're the Flame artist, you manage kind of the creative and the relationship with the not really the production company, most of the time the agency, the advertising agency. So the client will come to us with a commercial or a storyboard. And I shadowed our senior visual effects supervisor for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half doing this. And he was really, and this was part of I think the reason I was able to move so quickly was that I had artists that took me on as mentors, and not just in a kind of passive way, actively mentoring me, come in here, watch while I do this, be on the call while I'm doing this. And I benefited from that greatly because I really wanted to be a really good visual effects artist. And I thought it was cool. I loved the idea of working with clients and having a client ask me my opinion on like whether this is a cool thing to do or whether it would make their shot look better or make their commercial look better. And so I put in a lot of time shadowing and going into like my seniors setups at night after he would leave finishing work. I would go into his computer and I would look at how he did things, and then the next morning ask him how he did it. And then that's how I kind of like slowly learned how to do those kind of things.
Yeah,
I quickly became really fast at doing it because I was basically just copying what he was doing and replicating it and teaching myself. I really, in the first 3 years, also one of the big stopping points for people, junior artists at that time anyways, was Flame at the time cost somewhere between like, I don't know, $200,000 to $300,000 to get a setup.
Right. And
we had 6 Flames at our office and 2 Flame artists.
Yeah, I want to reiterate that. You said $200,000 to $300,000.
Yes.
For one Flame setup.
One Flame setup.
That's why it's the Rolls Royce of VFX software. So the people who are completely unrelated to visual effects, if any of you are listening or watching, normally it's, an expensive license is like, $5,000. Now it's even now you can get it like on a monthly basis, which makes it much cheaper.
Now Flame is actually even cheap. It's so cheap now. You can get a monthly license. I think it's $500 a month for Flame.
Got it.
And they allow you to have it on Macs. But in 2013, you couldn't have Flame on a Mac. It had to be a certified HP machine with specific hardware. So you had to buy like $5,000 graphic GPUs, multiple of them. I think our setups had like 2 or 3. Got it. Like NVIDIA GPUs and the P versions, the P6000s or whatever, not the game graphics cards.
Crazy, which are crazy expensive.
Yeah, crazy expensive. And we had we would have like 4 or 5 terabytes. No, I think my first machine had 16 terabytes of SSD RAID storage in it.
Wow.
So the machine, go for it.
And the question I guess people will ask, well, why not just get Maya or 3 Studio Max, or After Effects or Nuke, right? I mean, the compositing softwares. Why pay 200? Like, what about it justifies this cost, this price tag?
I mean, I think part of it is the nature of the industry and just the nature of how the commercial advertising industry was formed. Like Flame came into commercial advertising when it was kind of the only thing that you could do or work on, The history of Flame in commercial advertising, it's kind of like this shrouded, magical, expensive Rolls-Royce software, because when commercial advertising was big, like in the 90s in New York City, you couldn't do the things that you could do now in like Nuke and stuff on any other software except for Flame.
Right.
That was what studios and visual effects studios and edit houses were using to finish their entire commercials. It was the last stop, and it was used initially as like a finishing package. So all of the other software, this is when people talk about, this is a distinction in commercial where people say online and offline. So offline edit, when you're doing the editorial, you take the high res footage and you convert it so it's like a low res file or low res images that you can edit in a smaller computer or on a smaller machine and do all of your editorial work before you get to the online part, which is basically you up-res or you relink back to the high-res footage that you're going to do the final finishing and grading on before you deliver the commercial, right? And Flame at the time was a visual effects software that you could do online work with, right? So you could do it's not real time, but it was really fast online visual effects work, and you've been able to do that on Flame since like the late 90s. There was no hiccups. The scrubbing, part of that was because of the massive amount of storage it had, 16 terabytes, and it would pre-cache all of the image sequences that went into the software. So it had built a pipeline and infrastructure that allowed the software to move much faster than anything else. And when you're doing client sessions for $2 million Super Bowl commercials and they need the commercial out in 30 minutes, you don't want to be sitting there pressing the render button and waiting for that thing to load.
Right, for sure.
So yeah, and at the time, when people were using the software, it was worth it because people were billing like $10 million a year in commercials. So having one package that you're going to use for multiple years that's only $200,000-$300,000 is worth it. But the industry has shifted greatly from where it was, right?
Yeah, and I'm very curious because I've been in the industry since then. I mean, since not the 90s, but the early 2000s. But I've never actually put my hands on a flame computer. Because partially because I wasn't really very deep into commercials at any point, but I've always found it curious and fascinating. Why is it so expensive, and what do people, what justifies this price tag? And I think that the one thing that you mentioned there was client review, client facing
work. Yeah.
So that's the reason why it's important for it to be very responsive and without a lot of render time and a lot of waiting, because you have client in the room. You don't want to waste their time. You want them to feel like their notes are being addressed, quickly. You want them to see what their notes, because traditionally, people know that normal compositing and visual effects work takes time. So you give us notes, we go away and we come back 2 days later with updates. But what you're talking about, which is online, which means it's like the finishing, right? The last stretch of the commercial. Sometimes, you're pressed against a deadline and you really have to leave that room with a finished commercial that day. You can't wait for a 12-hour render.
Well, in commercial world too, if you miss your deadline, you're costing the client. So if they miss their air date, let's say you have a commercial that has to go for the Super Bowl, and it needs to be at the distributors or the person that's the studio, that's the network that's going to be distributing it. It has to be there by like 12 p.m. Tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you miss that time, they'll either sell your slot to another person or another commercial, or you get fined like severely. It could be sometimes you could fines of hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars for missing an air date. Wow. Because they'll just be like, you lost your spot and we didn't have it enough time to air the Super Bowl commercial. Because there's a whole process for commercials for it to air on TV. They have to be QC'd by a company like Extreme Reach, and then that has to go to the network, and then the network QC's it before they air it, and they want to make sure that there's no mistakes, or there are all these specs and things. It's like delivering a DCP for a film, basically, but like all the time.
So that must be a pretty stressful situation to be sitting in a room knowing that, there's a hard deadline, your client has notes. If you're not going to be able to address those notes in time, of course, the client is not going to leave without a commercial if they know there's a deadline, but...
but you get in trouble for missing an air date. I know people that have been fired for missing air dates on delivery. So there is an element of stress in it, and that's why it's like live visual effects. And that's kind of where I came up in the visual effects world, is like doing client-facing visual effects. So like imagine like, instead of getting a note from your supervisor and they walk away and they're like, can you do this, hit these notes? The client's sitting behind you. They're like drinking coffee and eating sushi. And they're like, yeah, we want the guy's arm to be bigger. And you got to be able to do it there in front of them while they're watching.
Wow.
And you learn all the ways to try to, and that the great thing for me is like, you learn all of these skills in communicating and customer service and and kissing up and all these kind of like ways of managing. And a lot of the times in the visual effects commercial, where you call it running the room, right? As the lead visual effects artist during a client session, you're running the room, right? You're making sure that the client's happy. You're also at the same time emailing with your producer, trying to make sure you're getting assets from. It's very stressful. You're like the orchestrator, and at the same time working on the shot.
Right.
So that was part of the reason why flame artists were so coveted, is because it was like high stress Olympic visual effects, basically.
Yeah.
I joke with some of my like artists now that, you know, they've always done like TV and episodic stuff. Like it's just so less stressful. I feel like, you know, my heart rate now from when I was doing a lot of commercial VFX has gone way down. Like if I'm looking at my Fitbit watch, you know, it's like my my heart rate is just so much easier having longer deadlines. You know, I used to finish commercials in like a full-on commercial. I used to do a bunch of commercials where the client would give us a brief. They would shoot it in like a day and a half, and it would need to be delivered in like 3 days.
Wow.
For a full-on commercial, 30-second commercial. And that included doing the color, and that included doing all of the visual effects for it, putting the graphics on it, and getting it to the extreme reach or whatever it needs to be go to be distributed. So there were times where it was like really, really stressful. But I think the people that manage that well and come out of it, they're kind of like a different breed of visual effects, you know, because I became really good at, especially at a place like NBC, I became really good at making sure that I was outputting quality visual effects, but as efficiently as possible. You know, any clever, interesting way I could figure out how to save time without sacrificing quality, I took it. And I taught myself how to composite in that way for a long time. There's some things I had to unlearn as I moved into TV and film, because the pipeline and the workflow is so completely different, and it's so much longer. And it's like, you know, it's not as, you don't have to do things that are a little bit more destructive. You know, in Flame, when I was doing things, a client would ask me to accomplish something. My goal was more a one-off solution. I was like, I need to get this done in 10 minutes. They're never going back to it. And how can I make this butterfly turn into a car in 10 minutes without, you know, like without having to go into CG and render this thing out, you know? Where now in TV and film, I'd more be like, oh, somebody else is going to have to pick up this butterfly turning into a dragon. I need to do it in a procedural way where we can adjust it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated because first of all, you know, going into, I can imagine myself doing, you know, taking what I know now, which is, you know, years of experience in visual effects, and translating it into being on a, you know, on a flame station with the client right behind my back, and having the confidence to say, you know, this is how I'm going to attack this. I know this is going to work. This is not going to work, because after years of experience, you kind of you develop this instinct of like, you know, what's the fastest way to get to that result. And visual effects, the thing about visual effects is that every project, you know, introduces new challenges that you might have not faced before, and it takes a little bit of experience to kind of even just manage your your knowledge and figuring out. It sounds to me like you've been sort of thrown into the deep water, the deep end of the pool very quickly.
Like that has been kind of like my whole career has been just being thrown into the deep end of the ocean and trying to survive. And luckily I have survived, and I've actually done very well, but it has been, I almost wish I could have padded a couple years in between sometimes just so I wouldn't be as stressed, but I don't know. I'm good at what I do now. My strengths come from that experience and story. And so maybe if I did go a different route, maybe I wouldn't be as efficient as an artist. I don't know. You know, I just know that I am the type of artist I am now because of that experience and that route I took. And you know, I see the benefits of it, and I also see the negative parts of it as well, you know? Yeah.
I mean, from my experience, I think my ability to work with clients, I can attribute it to the fact that that my job trajectory and my experience is similar to my clients, because I went to film school and because I've directed and worked on multiple film sets, not as a visual effects artist, as a filmmaker, you know. And so I know I can speak their language. I understand their priorities. I can soothe them if necessary, or like, you know, kind of
ease their worries.
yeah, ease their worries and basically kind of put a smiley face on the visual effects side of things, which a lot of people find intimidating just because they don't know much about it. And I can translate it into terms that they are familiar with, and also show them that it's really a lot of fun once you get a hang of it. And you don't really need to think too much out of the, you don't need to leave your comfort zone that much to really start to understand what visual effects are, what you can use them for, and how to adjust your mind frame. But from my own experience, and I've had that in the past where I had clients sitting behind me. Of course, I wasn't using Flame. I was using whatever After Effects or whatever software.
I think you would like Flame. It's fast, man. It's fun. It's like you jump in the Lamborghini. It's like, boom, you're like, oh snap, it's going.
That might be the reason. I mean, I always had this thing where it's like I have someone sitting next to me and they give me notes and I just want get out of the room, please. Like just come back in a day. Tell me what you want and I'll do it. I've had that experience. I've never said that to the person next to me, but I've had that experience where it's like, okay, I've heard your note. Let me go to it, and I'll get back to you in about 15 minutes. Go grab a bite, take a sandwich or something, and do something else. And that interaction, I mean, it takes a lot out of you. Just the being
training,
being being polite and
you're the guy, but you're also the guy when you're in that seat. When you're managing the job, when you're managing a project, when you're the direct client-facing person. It doesn't matter if it's Flame or After Effects or whatever. You're the guy. You're the person with the responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think that it does two things. It makes you become much more mature, I think, as an artist in learning how to coordinate and work with, your clients and be professional and, hit your goals as the goals for the job. And it doesn't sound as sexy, but it's very important because you learn a lot of leadership skills as an artist that is doing things client facing, because there's a lot of responsibility there. And if you want to succeed, you have to be able to get the job done in time, make the client happy, and make your company some money at the same time. And that all is part of the responsibility of like a lead artist, in my mind anyway, or a supervisor. And not everybody wants that kind of responsibility. I've known artists that are freaking incredible artists, and I've just been like, man, like I really would love for this person to become a supervisor just so that they could help other artists creatively,
right.
But they just don't want that. They don't want that responsibility and that stress, because some people just want to be pure artists, and there's nothing against that. But the reason a lot of times people wanted to become Flame artists, also Flame artists got paid a lot more. I knew Flame artists that like back in early 2000s, there may be a few left now. I don't think there are very many that were making, $200 plus $300,000 a year as a visual effects artist.
Wow. Yeah.
But that came with the responsibility of being the client facing person. And if you got really good at your job, clients would come back for you. And that's what your value becomes as an artist, especially for your studio. If people start coming back, that's why I got to the point where I started having art clients come back to me and say, or come back to the studio and say, oh, like we want to work with Bilali on this job.
Yeah.
Or bring a whole job to the companies, $500,000 to $1 million job, just to work with one person. That's when you start having that leverage and value as a visual effects artist in the commercial space or any job. I think, once you become so good at your job, the clients are asking for you personally. That was the allure, I think, of Flame artists. You become really, really good and really good intimate with your clients, and they love the work, and you guys have a rapport. They'll ask for you. That's when you start being able to, eventually start your own studio if you want it.
Yeah. And I know, you might know, do you know Vico Sharabani?
Oh, yeah, I know Vico. Okay, I almost worked for Vico once. He almost... Yeah, I was like, when I was actually getting ready to leave, it was the year before I left to go to MPC. I was checking out places. Vico interviewed me, and
for the Artery.
For the Artery, yeah. He interviewed me. That was early on, I think not early on, but earlier. And he offered me a position. I didn't take it. I thought about it, but It was just different timing.
Yeah.
They're great though. They're awesome. The work that he's doing, that guy is he's a killer. He's great.
Yeah, I'm very curious because I've heard him talk to Alan McKay actually about his history. I know him personally as well.
Yeah, he's straight up flame artist. Yeah.
Yeah. And his story was very, I mean, he really owes his career to being one of the first people in Israel who sat on a flame station. I think he might have been the first one. I mean, of course, he's super talented and he took this opportunity and like flew with it, right? Not everybody would be able to do that. But the fact that he was there at that time really kind of singled him out and kind of jump-started his whole career. He has a lot of gratitude towards Flame. I think they probably still, I know they're definitely using Flame. I just did a project with them actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago. I actually I VFX supervised on set here in LA for them, partially because there's a part of this project that I took the responsibility to do something with deep fakes.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah, but. I think it's probably one of the first times we worked together. We've been dying to work together for a long time, and it's awesome, finally happened.
It was great.
Yeah, and so it's funny that you guys were in touch about working together. But I think I'm very curious because it's like. Now what you're saying one brings me to the next subject I wanted to talk to you about, which is the transition. So you've, I don't know how recently, but a while ago, you moved from doing commercials, which you mentioned, which is very...
So I moved into film and TV a year ago.
A year ago?
Almost to this day, yeah.
Oh, cool. Congrats.
Yeah.
On your anniversary of that motion. So I'm curious about how you did that transition and what kind of change it introduced, and specifically you've mentioned in terms of being in commercials. I'll give you my assumption, and then you can kind of debunk it completely or add to it. Commercials is a smaller operation, shorter turnaround, very like human centric. Well, you mentioned commercials want to work with Bilali on this project. Clients in the commercial field want to work with you. I would imagine that long form TV or feature films are less so in terms of like, we want to work with Bilali, or even if they want to work with you, they want to work with you as a supervisor, which means you'll be with them on set and, maybe walk them through the project as a whole, but you're not going to be sitting on a flame station for the most of it. I don't know if you even use flame at all for these longer form.
I use it every once in a while. I jump between both. Every once in a while, I'll jump into flame, but I use flame and nuke. More nuke now than ever.
Mm-hmm.
At MPC, we use flame and nuke interchangeably.
Yeah,
for compositing. Flame generally led the projects. And now I kind of use nuke. Use nuke for all of like the shot work that we do, and every once in a while I'll jump into flame if I want to do like some look dev or if there's something I kind of want to play with.
Right.
Just because it's what I started out in, but I generally use almost all nuke. And what was great about MPC is that they kind of made sure that we were software ambidextrous because they knew that nuke was very affordable, and as far as talent wise in the city, it was becoming harder and harder to find young affordable junior flame artists,
right?
But the transition, I would say what I will say is, as far as the length of time that jobs lasted, definitely much shorter timelines for commercials. The size of the projects, I think it ranged. If we had like a really big commercial, we could hire, if it's like a Super Bowl commercial, big one with lots of big visual effects shots, we could end up with a team the size of like 20, 25
right.
people.
Wow. Yeah.
For a big Super Bowl commercial. You see some of these big PlayStation commercials with like massive scale visual effects, like big environments, creatures and characters, those kinds of things. You need really big teams for that.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of heavy CG. I will say, actually, I feel like I'm doing less CG right now than I was actually when I was at NPC doing commercials, just because a lot of the episodic work we do is mostly kind of like 2D visual effects. You know, a lot of there's one of the series that I'm supervising right now is it's called Go. Well, it was called Go. Season just finished, but the spinoff Kanan, same kind of deal. It's a lot of like blood hits, a lot of gunfights.
Right.
We do some period environment cleanup stuff. Every once in a while, we'll use some effect stuff to simulate blood, you know, from someone getting shot in the neck or getting cut or something like that. But a lot of the work is more 2D compositing work now rather than 3D. Obviously, if we got a bigger show like Westworld or something with like dragons and characters, we would obviously scale up for more CG, but we're not doing a lot of that kind of work yet.
Got it.
But yeah, as far as the shift, one of the biggest things for me was just like the length of time and how much time, the length of time and the sharing and repetitive nature of the kind of work you're doing in episodic and TV, episodic specifically, but in film as well. In commercials, we finish a commercial, there was maybe 50-60% chance you would do something with those assets again, right? Most of the time it was like a one-off commercial.
Right.
You archive it, you go back into it if you needed to pull some things out.
Right.
In TV and film right now, we're doing Ghost Power, which we have like 3 spin-offs that are coming down the pipe. Each season is about like 10, 11 episodes. So I have to make sure that the assets and tools and things we create are procedural and they're built in a way that we can continue to use them, or else you're wasting time and money of everyone. It would be so inefficient to finish all of the work on one episode, and then the very next episode they want like something that's very similar to what you did in the first 7. You're like, oh, we archived it and put it away in like cold storage or something. You have to restore it to get it to it. So that's one of the big things, like becoming much more procedural in the kind of work we do. And then one of the great benefits for me is I always felt in commercials, I wasn't always getting the amount of time I would have liked to spend with the agency or the production company in figuring out how to solve visual effects problems or problems within the commercial. And now with film and TV, with, you know, we have like 10, 12 day shooting schedules rather than one day for commercial. There's a lot more planning that goes into it. I get a lot more face-to-face time with the directors. I establish relationships with the DPs that are on for the whole season. You know, we establish like a workflow together. I know the production designer. I have their phone numbers. Whenever we jump into a new shot or a new scene that needs some visual effects help, we already have a rapport and a workflow, and I get much more time, 3 or 4 meetings to figure out a thing rather than having to figure out almost on the day with commercials. Right. So there's a lot more relaxing as far as the stress of trying to solve stuff on the fly, you know?
Got it. So even as a vendor side VFX supervisor, you hold kind of personal relationships with the production designer and the director of photography and the director?
Yeah, I do. I usually, I think it depends, I guess, for the show that you're working on, but for our shows, we have good relationships with the studios, and we also have good relationship with like the executive producers, because we have like a lot of our series are series that we've worked on for 6 seasons or something, 3, 4+ seasons. They bring on a lot of the same crew. Although the cinematographers have been on there. Every once in a while, a cinematographer will jump to another show, but guys that have been working for 2 or 3 seasons, I've worked with them on like 7 or 8 episodes. So we know each other at that point. Yeah. I get their info. I give all of production that I'm kind of directly more in contact, like the production designer, the assistant director, the DP. I give them all my phone number. So if they have a question on set, if I can't be there, they can just give me a call. And they're like, hey, we're doing like this screen comp in the middle of the night. Should we have it on? Should we put green screen? What should we do? And I can just answer the question on the phone, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
that
great.
was a challenge that I faced when I did VFX Supervisors, a series at some point, and there you have, because series are being shot, obviously an episode after an episode, the same DP goes and shoots the whole season, but directors shift, and sometimes one director is going to be prepping the next episode while a different director is on set directing the current one. I found it. I don't know how the DP does it. I mean, the fact that that they have to prep while shooting is crazy to me, because even as a visual effects supervisor, I found myself kind of torn between, wait a second, should I be in this prep meeting and figure out how to, kind of communicate what's going to happen in the next week, or should I be on set shooting a scene that requires visual effects right now, and they could, that could go wrong if I wasn't there.
The answer is both.
Right, I know, it's crazy. And sometimes it's really, I mean, I was at the place where I was like, I took, in the middle of the day, I would like run to the office, have a production meeting, then run back to set.
Yep.
Hope that they didn't mess things up. Usually they do, but
you just like, I think for me, but because of my experience being in commercials, I just felt that kind of stuff was a little bit difficult. Like you said, one of the things I will say is there are a lot more meetings that I have to be at, a lot more than in commercials. Like you're saying, there's a prep meeting, there's a concept meeting, there's a VFX stunt meeting.
Right.
All that stuff is happening while I'm supposed to be on set for certain things. I lean a lot on my producer and even my production coordinator, or my VFX coordinator, and they're fantastic. And I think when you're I don't know what your situation was for that series, but like for me, on the vendor side, I have a fantastic producer that understands visual effects well enough that I trust them to jump into a prep call without me, and then just send me an email after with questions. I have a coordinator that I trust to go through my script and go through the script if I didn't have a chance to look through something, and make me aware of things that they feel like would be visual effects worthy. And I think those things are very important if you're trying to do a big show or you're scaling up in working on like a series, because it's impossible for you to be everywhere at the same time.
Right.
And a lot of times I have to choose and decide what is the most important thing for me to be at right now, and where do I add the most amount of value for the show, Yeah. And are there things that a lot of times I make decisions that are like, how badly can they fuck this up if I don't get to it, how badly can you fuck up a screen comp?
Exactly.
If there's a person that's getting shot in their face and their head has to blow up, I would take prioritizing
the screen comp can wait, can be worst case you'll manually track it or something.
Exactly. So those are the kinds of ways I approach that, and for me, I've been able to do that because of my pedigree in commercial visual effects, like being in a room and the client saying they need to do this now, and then my producer saying we don't have this asset, and I'm like, fuck, which thing should I do right now? Choose your own adventure. What will destroy the project? What will save it? So like making decisions like that, actually from my pedigree, I think commercials help me be able to quickly like assess, make decisions. And I think that a lot of the times when you're more of a supervisor or your lead visual effects artist, that's one of your strengths and skills that people don't get to work on very often. Having to make these stressful decisions that there is always going to be some kind of consequence, but you have to assess which consequence is, acceptable.
Right. It's basically that is having the big picture in mind every time, and kind of being able to distance yourself from the task at hand at the moment, and sort of look at the whole, look at the context and being like, well, this is not the most important thing to be wasting my time on, or there's something I'm trying to put this fire out right now, but there's a tsunami right behind it that I should probably be worried more about. And you're also obviously supervising in studio, so you're in charge of the artists that are behind you. And when you mentioned you know, 20 to 25 artists coming on board on a big commercial with a lot of CG assets, creatures, destruction,
Yeah.
all that stuff. I imagine in a commercial, it's more of a freelance type scenario where you bring on that workforce when you need it. It's not,
Yeah, we for sure for the commercial standpoint, if it was a really big commercial, we would scale up based off of the project. And we had usually a core team of like
yeah,
3 compositors assigned to a commercial generally. And we try to figure it out. And if we needed CG help, we would, you know, try to delegate CG artists accordingly to
and
each project.
and is that something that right now when you're in TV and kind of longer form VFX work, you have the 3D people on staff kind of ready?
No, we don't have as many CG artists in house as we would probably need. I think for us, it would be a matter of anticipating if a big project was coming with a lot of CG.
Yeah.
But we have the capability to hire freelance CG artists if
Yeah.
we need. So that's not really a problem. Yeah, and so we do that a lot of the times. And I think that is something that almost any company now has to be able to do. Unless depending on the volume of work that you have coming in, I think most studios that are mid to small size visual effects studios, you have to be able to scale because that's just the nature of the industry right now. I think, you know, unless you're like see working in big feature films and you know you're going to have those people, even those companies don't really staff up that many. They usually have these permalance freelancers that are from all over the world that come in for a project, you know.
Yeah.
You're like a hired gun kind of for those kinds of projects. I find that our team right now, we don't have as many CG artists. We have more compositors, and we scale up depending on the project. I think our core company, like the core staff right now, the compositors, we probably have like 7 or 8 compositors.
Okay.
We have the other 50% of our like compositors are like permalance that we always kind of call, and they're usually mostly available, you know, for projects that we work on, and that's kind of just how it's been going. And obviously, if we had a lot more volume, we'd start thinking about hiring people. But because of the nature of episodic work in the city, you know, that's kind of how it goes.
So, and in the city, you mean, so most productions you're working on are being shot in New York?
Yeah. Yep. So most of our production, almost everything I've worked on has been shot in New York. Some of the film stuff that I did early on, like Let 'Em Go, that was obviously not shot in New York, but that was like the studio visual effects supervisor. It was like studio side. It was like, hey, we have this sequence that we want you guys to work on. And they gave it to us and we just finished it, you know?
Got it. And the other thing I wanted to ask about is the transition from commercial to film. Was it basically moving from the company that you were at the time doing commercials to another company that had more film projects, or?
Yeah. So part of the reason I decided to take that jump was just I'd done commercials at that point for like, I don't know, 6-7 years. And I didn't feel like I was being challenged. I just like always wanted to move into like the episodic, like TV film world. Netflix was like really hot, and you know, all these streaming platforms were doing a great job.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best content now. It's better than theatrical.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I was just like, man, I really want to get into TV and film industry and in the visual effects sense. And so I started looking around, seeing what studios were in New York City. And I applied to, the first place I applied to was Alchemy. It was one of the first, I think a friend recommended me. They said they had good people. I'm really about working with good culture, having a good culture at a company, because I think it's important for the work that you do and you know, the productivity and the growth of a company. And I applied, and you know, we had a few conversations about what they were expecting, what they wanted out of me. I was upfront about the fact that I had done almost all commercials. I had helped out on some episodic film stuff, and they They were just like, okay, yeah, we like your work. We like your aesthetic. That was, I think, a lot of it. Like I had very strong work from MPC that had like a very strong style and very grounded in photo reality. So that's like a lot of my work is like photoreal visual effects.
Yeah.
So they liked it and they liked me. They talked to some people around the city, probably to see if I was a psychopath or not. And and they were like, yeah, okay, we'll take you. And so I came on, and one of the first jobs I worked on was that Let 'Em Go film, where we did a whole sequence where we were adding smoke and fire into a burning building.
Okay.
And I worked with the director. He was great, fantastic first experience in, like long form visual effects. And then after that, I slowly started pushing my way into supervising all of the stuff for the Power universe and for Ghost and Kanan, all of this stuff for the Stars Network. And yeah, and I've been doing it now for a year, and we finished the first season of Ghost in December, and it did really well for the network, and they got approved for 3 more seasons.
Wow,
so,
that's great. That's
yeah.
So many more seasons at once. That's pretty cool.
I can work on this probably forever if I want.
Great.
I think it's like their highest grossing show. People really love it.
Ghost. I have to check it out. I actually don't think I've seen it.
Check it out. It's drug dealing. They do a lot of drug dealing and shooting and killing, and lots of people getting shot in the head, stabbed, all that kind of stuff.
Fun. Sounds like a lot of challenging shots in visual effects. And were you intimidated to get into film, like from just the unknown and the fact that it's something that it's relatively different from commercial, like you mentioned, the move from.
I was definitely intimidated, I think, in the beginning, but I didn't really let it stop me because I knew we had hired freelance visual effects artists that had worked in episodic and film.
Right.
And I had conversations with them about the work. I had seen their work. And I knew coming from MPC, the quality level of the visual effects that we did was, in my mind, as good as any other studio, in the world. And so I wasn't intimidated whether or not I'd be able to hit the mark as far as like the quality of the work. I was intimidated about understanding a lot of the episodic like lingo and understanding a lot of the like workflow from a visual effects standpoint. But I tried to focus as much as I can on the work and the quality of the work, and I leaned on my producers that had much more experience in visual effects, just for jargon and stuff. It's like I'd be on calls and they'd be like, yeah, we're like shooting odds and evens, and I'd be like, cool, sounds great. And then I'd jump to the side and be like, what the fuck are they talking about, shooting odds and evens? And then my producer would tell me, I'd be like, oh, they're just shooting, one DP shooting all of the even episodes. And then I'd be like, okay, great, that's cool, got it. So that's kind of the thing I've been doing for the year, and it's great for me because I love learning, and I'm a fast learner, and I'm enjoying that part of the process, because it got to the point where, not saying there was nothing else I could learn in commercial visual effects, but it was nice to kind of change up and challenge myself a little bit in this kind of different aspect of it. And it's been great.
And also, I guess it brings me to ask you another question about the craft of storytelling is different, and for long form versus commercials. Like commercials, you got maybe 5 visual effects shots. Each of them is part of the story, and that's the story. You end up with like a story told in 5 shots, whereas in episodic, sometimes you'll do, you might work on one shot that is, or 5 shots that are kind of minutes apart, are related to different story points. But in general, how do you kind of, what is your view on the role of visual effects in storytelling, and specifically in long form storytelling as opposed to short form?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I came from a film background ish, like I wanted to go into film, so I'd studied film for a long time. I love storytelling films. and movies. And my approach early on was for visual effects was trying to see if I can imbue some kind of meaning into the visual effects work I was doing. My personal belief as a visual effects artist is that like the the visual effects that you're doing is there to serve the story, you know? Like you shouldn't be doing extra as far as like the goal of your visual effect without it like helping the story. If you're doing so much that like the VFX is taking more center stage than the story and it doesn't need to, then I feel like there's a problem there. And so I always kind of approached it, I guess, from a more of a macro sense of like the story. I would say that like in a commercial standpoint, it feels like when you're doing visual effects storytelling, it's also the nature of visual effects. You had a sense where it was an exercise, you know, almost like a film school exercise. Right. It's like you have 4 shots to be able to, you know, make you feel some kind of emotion over this, you know, can of soda, right? And you had to make sure that the visual effects was doing that. And I think whenever I think of visual effects, I try to break it down by going like from the shot level, like what is the purpose of the visual effect I'm doing here for this shot? And then go into the macro level of like, how does this shot fit into the sequence, and how does this sequence fit into the whole film? And that's kind of my approach for it, starting smaller because it's easier for me to kind of focus on that, and then from that shot to the sequence, from the sequence to the whole film or the whole commercial. And that's kind of how I've approached it, and it's worked out well for me. You know, I think it makes it much easier to be like, oh, like, you know, does this flame have to be that big? Is it real? Does it make any sense for that? And I do that to a level where even when we're doing stuff where it's a muzzle flash for a gun, right? I expect my artists to be able to communicate some kind of, you know, intent on why they chose that muzzle flash. Right. What's the story behind the muzzle flash? Does it fit for the gun? And if you're exaggerating it, why are you exaggerating it? Are you exaggerating it because it's helping tell some kind of story that's happening in the sequence? Like if it's a sequence, like I do that a lot, where if it's a shot where a hero character is being killed in a film and you want to do some muzzle flash and interactive lighting, and you want to see like more interactive lighting light the person's face up because you want to make it more dramatic. Yeah. As long as you can explain that to me, I'll back you up, because I have to be able to tell the director and the EPs on my side that this is the reason I made this decision. If you can't explain the reason you made the choice, then, you know, I'm not going to allow you to just do it. I'll just force you to do. Well, I won't force you, but you have to be able to. It's like you have to be able to explain the intent behind why you're doing that. And I expect myself to be able to explain the intent behind why I'm making choices as a visual effects artist. And my guiding compass is always back to the story. And that's how kind of I work with my artists. And I try to say, like, there is no like leader as far as the visual effect in my shows. You know, if I am working on a shot or a sequence and I have a dumb idea for why I'm doing something, and someone's like, that doesn't make any sense, this makes way more sense, I'd be like, yo, you're right, Todd. That's what we should do, you know, because it makes it much easier to lead and supervise, because I'm not the final say. The script and the story is the final say. Right. And if everybody agrees that that is much better for the story, then I got to shut up. Yeah, I think it's interesting the difference, because a lot of times, you know, in when you do a commercial, the product is the story. I mean, it's not as simple as that, but a lot of times, like your guide is going to be, let's make the product look good. Or let's make the commercial needs to kind of represent the company, represent the brand, you know, kind of the emotion that you're trying to get from the commercial a lot of times is, you know, impress the audience. Whereas, and that's something that sometimes, go for it. That's something that for us artists is kind of a lot of artists spend a lot of time and a lot of energy
figuring out how to make things look pretty, cool, impressive. And then you get to the narrative, and a lot of times, you'll make a visual effects shot that's going to look ugly, or not. I mean, not the visual effects itself, but the shot is going to look ugly, and you're going to have to kind of struggle with yourself because your instinct is, to make it look better, but the story calls for it to look ugly.
Exactly.
I mean, and you're, yeah, and I think that's an interesting distinction that you probably, especially when you're doing series that are gritty about these kind of, heavy subjects that are real, that are important, that are, real
And
world
that's part of the
problems.
reason that's part of the reason I wanted to move more into film and TV, is because like in episodic visual effects, like I'm sorry, in commercial visual effects, not everything you're going to work on is going to be like this incredible award-winning thing, or even have a story or a meaning.
Right.
And I kind of found myself working on a lot of those kinds of jobs and being like, man, there's no soul or spark or anything behind this. It's just
Right.
really, this is just a thing to just sell something. And I would try really hard to force meaning into things that are really inconsequential narrative or inconsequential exercise in selling stuff to people.
Right.
And so, how much story can you add into like I don't know, heartburn commercial?
Right.
You can try, and sometimes it can get a little bit of a reaction out of people if you craft it well. But I just felt like what was at the core of it wasn't as meaningful as I would have felt if it was like a film or a TV. And so that's kind of why I shifted more into that space.
Right. And I mean, that's something that I think a lot of artists are struggling to at some point in their life, and people in all professions, but we just as much, is like finding a higher purpose for everything, and like, and with everything that's going on in the world right now, all the real world problems and challenges and issues, it's like, how can you make a difference? I mean, we all know people like Elon Musk who feels like humanity needs to be multiplanetary, and then goes and creates a space companies to make that into a reality. And I think I definitely kind of hit my head against the wall a lot of times, thinking, what is the best usage of my time? How can I make a real difference in this world, doing what I like to do, which is, this and storytelling and stuff, but at the same time also making sure that it serves a higher purpose. And I think that's
I think that's a very big existential life question that everyone kind of faces at some point. And as a artist especially, I think if you feel like you are an artist, you have this, I think, calling and need to want to create something that can have some kind of meaning, or change the world, or make the world a little bit better place, or even just express human emotion. There are a lot of reasons I think people create art and want to work on art. And like you said, you always eventually get to a point where you feel like you want to make something that has some kind of higher purpose or meaning, or helps or influence people in a certain way, or just makes people think a little differently. I think good art doesn't have to be something that, always changes the world, but it should bring some kind of new perspective to the person that's looking at it, shift the way of thinking in some kind of way.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really beautiful about TV and where it's been heading in the last few years. Not only that they do that quality storytelling now more than ever, but it's also that they're choosing, they're shifting their perspective on storytelling, and they're really trying to touch upon subjects that are current and that are important. I mean, I really like. I actually haven't seen Ghost or Power, but I think I loved Breaking Bad and The Wire, and more recently,
Ozark.
No, Lovecraft. Is that in
Oh
Lovecraft
yeah, Lovecraft. I've seen that.
County?
Yeah, that's good.
Which is full of visual effects and it's really high concept and cool. But I really, I mean, I don't know. I might be looking at it from a very kind of narrow, uh, privileged point of view. But
Yeah, yeah, sure.
but the idea of like taking this sort of taking the genre, fantasy and horror and all that,
Yeah.
those genres, and doing what sorry, I'm blanking. I actually
HBO.
no, the creator, one of the
Oh, I don't even know.
producers,
I don't even know who the creator
Jordan
is.
Peele, I think, is at least one of
Is he a
them.
creator for it? I thought he was like a
Yeah, he's
like a
probably an executive producer, but I think
producer. Yeah.
I think I know that he brought the project to the creator. The creator is also a black female showrunner, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, cool.
But I think Jordan Peele was the one that kind of gave her the book and was like, "This is I want to do this," and she was like, "Really? They're going to do this on TV?" And that, and
He's like, Jordan, you gotta slow down, man. You keep trying to put black people everywhere.
exactly.
Relax.
But I mean, I loved what he did with Get Out, and then when I found out
Yeah.
he was involved with Lovecraft County, I was like, oh, of course. I mean, it's
Yeah.
this is his trademark now. I mean, it's
Well, I mean, it's just so funny that he's like his whole kind of thing right now is just let me just figure out a way to make these genres diverse
yeah,
because for a long time there were you didn't even just see any lead characters in
yeah,
these genres like so he's like let me make a mainstream fantasy film with more diversity and people are like whoa that's such a crazy idea how'd you think of that
right. No, it's
it's
I
like
mean
oh
it's
what black people like fantasy stories like that's crazy
I know, but that I mean, but what I like about his work, I mean, a lot of, and that's one thing that I kind of that I find being a distinction between Jordan's work, I mean, and other people in who are like him in this field versus other types of projects that are now seeing a lot more diversity for the sake of diversity. I think
Mhm.
his approach to it is or he kind of symbolizes, at least to me, a more kind of almost, I wouldn't call it militant, but a more argumentative approach, which is like it's not just I'm not just going to populate this sci-fi world with more diverse cast. I'm going to tell a story that speaks to me and people who look like me and who
Yeah.
have my background.
Yeah, I mean, it's like he's like, oh, I'm a black person. I'm telling a black story, and I'm talking to a black audience. You
Right.
know, so he has a lot of things in there that are black cultural things that if you didn't come from as a black person, you wouldn't appreciate it as much, or
Right.
you might not understand. But once you learn it and you understand it, you become part of that culture by
Yeah.
learning it, from the show, which I think is really interesting for other audience members. And the question that always comes up when you have storytellers like Jordan Peele or people that gain some kind of notoriety and decide that, oh, well, I have some kind of mainstream like power now and I can create stories that I want to
Right.
hear about people like me. People always say, oh, are you ever, I heard a question, people were like, oh, Jordan, are you ever going to make a film with a white lead character? And he was like, I mean, why would I make a film with a white lead character? He said his thing was that I've seen all those movies already.
Right.
Like, why is it like it's that? Why would because it's like the question the person should have asked themselves is like, if it's a black lead character, are you asking for a white lead character because you're saying what he's making is not mainstream,
Right.
right? Because the lead character is black. So he's like, well, are you going to go back to making some mainstream stuff with white lead characters? It's like, why are you always doing this fringe black stuff? It's like, no, it's just a story that's different than the one that you're used to hearing
Yeah.
or seeing. And the story is interesting because the character is black. So why would I imagine watching Get Out with a white guy as the lead?
Yeah,
Like nobody is
exactly.
not interested.
Yeah,
It's not
it's
interesting at all. You'd be like, oh, some white guy went to South with his white girlfriend, and it wouldn't work at all. The
no, and
reason his
that's
films work is because he's giving a different perspective, right? And I think some people want to call it like fringe, and they're like, oh, are you ever gonna what that guy wanted to know, really asking that question is, are you gonna make a cool another amazing story for white people?
right. Are you gonna make something for all of us, or
Are
just
you
for?
gonna make something because your black stories are super cool?
Yeah,
White people want some of your cool black stories, but what he's missing is that the story isn't cool because like it's a white character, or black character, or whatever. It's cool because he's telling an authentic
yeah,
experience and perspective that happens to have black cultural center around it.
yeah.
Jordan Peele could not make a great white story because he's not white.
Exactly.
There are some stories that are neutral as far as what their character, what their culturally, significance is. But what are interesting about his films is that he is touching on this culture that like has for a long time not been mainstream. So we're learning a lot of things about the culture, and you're hearing these jokes that are kind of like, oh, that's so funny. I haven't thought of it that way. I
Yeah.
haven't experienced that in that way,
I think also
So
that
yeah,
I think what you're talking about is like in terms of mainstream and having a white star is like a lot of times the white person in that main role is sort of like supposed to replace the concept of an everyday man, right?
yes,
Like
exactly.
the story of, I mean, Back to the Future. It doesn't have to be white people, but Marty McFly represents the average teen and teenager who's like
Exactly.
sucked into this
Yeah.
thing, which is, first of all, funnily enough, like, we go a few years in the future, white is not going to be the average person anymore. I'm
Yes.
not even sure it is now anymore, but
Yeah.
definitely, for audience members who want to see themselves, you want to,
Yeah.
white is not necessarily it.
And
And
people, it's funny because yeah, it's like, and for a long time, I think Hollywood and mainstream like Hollywood gatekeepers have not banked on a lot of those stories or invested in those stories because they just felt like they wouldn't be profitable because
yeah,
profit is what runs Hollywood, and some of it is biased because risk is not, for all Hollywood is as an industry, it's not a very risky. They're very risk averse.
yeah,
They want to tell stories that they can guarantee to make money. If you want to know the industry that is like very risk averse, look at Hollywood. How many Fast and Furiouses have these guys made? They'll just keep making them forever
it's funny.
until they run out of like numbers. They're going to use every number that they can. Fast and Furious 37.
I
Because
know,
it's
but
profitable and they know it, and they know it's not risky, and they can make money from it.
yeah, and I think an interesting signal of change is from the fact that places like Netflix are very commonly buy concepts from other places in the world. Like, I know when I moved to LA, which was about 10 years ago or even more, I actually had a conversation with the person who was one of my film teachers back in Israel, in Jerusalem, and he said,
Let
"You're."
my dog out.
Oh, sure. Yeah, don't keep
I'm
him
back.
hostage.
Yeah.
And he said, "Don't." He said, "Your decision to move into Los Angeles and making Hollywood films, you're not going to be able to make the same films that you can do here." That was kind of one of his arguments against moving. Not that he was trying to keep me from going. It was basically saying, you just kind of come to terms with the fact that you're not going to be able to tell the same stories over there as you can here. And cut forward 10 years later, you see companies like Netflix buying multiple show concepts and things like
They're
that.
buying showrunners. They're buying
Buying showrunners,
yeah,
studios from
scripts, writers, directors. They want diverse content.
from all of the
Because
world.
I mean, I think the great thing about Netflix is that for the visual effects, so not for the visual effects company there, for the storytelling, and I would call them, like studio that they are, they are an analytical company, and they have numbers that not all of us are privy to as far as what people are watching. And if they see that they have numbers, but they also, I think they work as a tech company.
Right.
And so a lot of that is testing things out. And for them, their test isn't deploying a piece of software. It's deploying like a mini series of a film or a TV show and seeing how well that does. If it does well, they get good numbers from it. They're like, okay, we can make this a full thing.
Yeah.
And this is something I don't think Hollywood has really been able to do. I mean, they've done it with a pilot episode of a show, but really how much information are you getting if one pilot episode doesn't get approved?
Yeah.
Because of it was played on like ABC at some random time. And I think Netflix is interesting because it has been disrupting for a long time. And now people are realizing, oh shit, like this diverse storytelling thing is actually profitable. Even in the superhero genre, they made Black Panther and they're like, oh shit, we can make money off of black superheroes. It's crazy. I think part of that is the distribution of films now is so different. So the access from people all around the world is much different. And also globally, I think we've become much more of a global culture. There's kind of been this like melding of culture because of the internet.
Right.
And, like Black Panther can do much better because there is kind of like a global culture that can have an understanding of it. And that's been a lot of the limits of films that are international. Look at Parasite. It won everything in America, Hollywood, right? And that's a foreign film. That was the first time a foreign film had done so well. And I think part of that is because we're, as consumers of stories and films, we are becoming a much more global culture.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And we're watching shows like Narcos and what was it? The Crown, which is British, but obviously still foreign.
Heist.
And
I heard this show Heist, Money Heist, I think is what it's called. Like a South American like thriller crime show. Like all these, we've become global storytelling consumers. And I think it's only great. It's only better for, storytelling. And I think it's only going to get better for, representation of people in the world.
And you mentioned that Netflix is also kind of ushering a change in the visual effects industry.
I think Netflix for me, I think is a very interesting company as far as their mindset in disruption, right? And I think when you have a company that has this kind of disruptive visual effects mindset or industry mindset, I have over the last couple of years, from a visual effects standpoint, noticed the ability, or not even the ability, the need from Netflix to try to become its own kind of like all in-house creator. One of the things I think that stood out to me that I kind of noticed was how Netflix has basically opened their own animation studio.
Right.
They do a lot of their own in-house animation. They did a lot of work recruiting and hiring people from Disney, people from Pixar, all of these big that we would think of traditional, tentpoles of animation in Hollywood and in California. And they're also working with places internationally to do stuff like create anime series. Like Netflix is like, when was the last time you would have thought like an American like studio would be creating anime in America, and part of that is creating and using their resources to create their own talent pool of visual effects artists and not only visual effects artists, visual effects supervisors, and also animation studios. And what I think has been really cool about it and interesting is that the quality level that they are trying to hold themselves up to is so outstanding, because I think they're trying to do things like future-proof themselves.
Right.
I think that's just kind of like a forward-thinking thing. And one of the things that came out, it was an article, I think I can see if I can find it. It was an article in July of this year that Netflix, I can send you the article, but Netflix is going to be creating its own, they are calling it NetFX platform.
Okay.
Where they're going to create basically their own visual effects remote workstations that they can spin up for visual effects artists for jobs that they'll be working on. So let's say they have a show that is I don't know, that my studio's working on, right?
Yeah.
And I need 30 visual effects artists, but I don't have the workstations for 30 visual effects artists. They'll spin up 15 of those remote workstations, and we can use those as visual effects workstations rented to us by Netflix to help subsidize or create the visual effects for the film. And I could imagine it in a world where this gets to the point where they, might end up finding enough in-house VFX supervisors where they can just spin up these machines for freelancers all over the world to coordinate and come up with a pipeline. Now, I'm not saying it's like some grand conspiracy where they're going to like take down every visual effects studio and hire their own people, but I feel like it's a very interesting challenge for the visual effects industry to see that Netflix is moving into this kind of territory on their own and being like, we're just going to create our own cloud visual effects workflow and our own cloud visual effects pipeline that we can hire visual effects artists, especially for shows like even mine, where they'd just be like, yeah, we just need someone to help do period cleanup.
Right.
It's not as creative for like 17 shots. Let's just spin up our own workstations, workflow pipeline. We'll cloud drop them the footage. They can work on it on our secure machines. We don't have to worry about anything, and then upload it back to us, and we can drop it in and finish the episode.
Right.
Instead of trying to find a studio to bid on it and do this, I think it might be a little bit of a way for them to get some of this less creative visual effects work in the beginning done without having to go through the whole process of bidding and finding a vendor that can do it.
It might,
which for me, I think it's a double-edged sword, because it'll be great sometimes probably for VFX artists as individuals, because you then you're able to have your career and your livelihood more in your hands rather than anyone else.
It's a democratization of like visual effects creatives and artists, because they don't have to be kind of incorporated under one company, for instance, or like, or tied to one company, even though it's a trend that seems to be expanding, that people are no longer tied to a single company and they are more free to roam around and stuff. But I mean, it's funny. It reminds me of this instance that I've had where I was like, I was bidding for this job in the commercial world, but I was looking for some artists, and I basically reached out to these artists that I've known that I thought would be perfect for this job, and put together a budget based on their availability and their and their skills, and I ended up not getting the job, but the studio that did get the job turned out to be working with the same artists. And my guess is that they actually bid higher than me, because they have way more overhead than I did. But maybe because the company was not sure that I would be able to handle the same capacity as they could, because they're a bigger studio, they chose to go, to go the safe route and pay more money for a studio that they do think has the capacity and infrastructure. Yeah. And then the job ended up taking place in the same exact place it would have through me, and they basically could have. So that might be also something that Netflix would be able to do, is like, to kind of get rid of some of the overhead and go directly to the talent.
For sure. I 100% feel like that is part of the goal of something like that. And I think in the same way that, they're disrupting the studio system right now in Hollywood by just studio and TV, by hiring showrunners themselves, by doing contracts with the directors,
Right.
I would imagine that they would find some super talented VFX artists or, supervisors and try to see if they can establish some kinds of relationships with them to take on visual effects and manage visual effects for them internally,
Yeah, I have friends who are sitting at an office here in Los Angeles, have their own little visual effects boutique house, and they're in somewhere in like a studio in Hollywood, and the whole building was like gradually kind of taken over by another, by Netflix. Another piece of the building was taken over by Netflix. Another piece, and it turns out that now they're like the last holdout, the one company like inside this big massive building, the one company that still is not Netflix.
But yeah, for sure.
Hold on, Mike. I have a
no problem.
I have a visitor. Come on.
I'm sorry, he's straight barged.
This is Torin. He wants to take part. Who's that? Say hi. This is Bilali. Say hi. He's like, he sees himself on the screen. He misses his dad. We've been taking too much time.
I know. Maybe we should be wrapping up soon.
Yeah.
He's like, all right, can we finish this visual effects talk?
He's like, okay, that's enough.
It's dinner time.
I'm done.
He's so quiet. He's entranced. Okay. He wants the mic. There you go. Edge. Yeah. Yeah. Soon he's gonna start doing podcasts himself. And,
Yeah, you teaching him visual effects?
yeah.
Get the pen in his hand early.
Right. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So, I mean, I wanted to talk to you about your own podcast, which, I mean, I know I started this podcast as part of my way of both meeting interesting people and having the conversations and having sort of archive and being able to go back and relive these moments, but also sharing my passion with others and spreading the love. And a byproduct of that is also, branding myself as someone who's not just does visual effects, but also talks about visual effects, loves visual effects, and likes to educate. So I'm curious, what is your podcast, and what purpose does it serve for you?
Yeah, so my podcast is called Legends of VFX, and it's a visual effects podcast. We're dropping an episode about once a month, and the whole purpose of it was, for me, I mean, I started it during COVID, and it was part like side project to keep me busy, but also with everything moving remote for visual effects, I just had a feeling that it would become more and more important for visual effects artists to try to dispel some myths and also to try to create understanding about the kind of work that we do and its importance in storytelling right now, specifically.
Yeah.
I felt like a lot of the work that was coming out, whether invisible or visible, had majority of a lot of visual effects. I only saw that growing, but I also felt like even to this day, people have a lot of misconceptions and understanding what goes into the visual effects that we see on these TV shows and these films. And so I was kind of trying to do it as like a show, like probably similar to you, to talk to interesting visual effects people that I know, but also to help dispel some of these myths and misconceptions about visual effects industry and visual effects artists. I've interviewed visual effects now. I think for me is like it started to meld a little bit, but like the idea was to have conversations with not only visual effects artists, but to have conversations with people that interact with the visual effects industry. So I've interviewed directors, I've interviewed motion design artists that I've worked with before, I've interviewed clients, because I always feel like that's one of the things people don't really talk about
Right.
is your relationship with your clients as a visual effects artist. And I'm hoping to continue it. We had a whole thing when all of the Black Lives Matter stuff was going on, where we talked about diversity in visual effects industry. And diversity of visual effects storytelling. We talked about Black Panther and things like that, and what they mean to like young kids that see themselves as superheroes now in these visual effects films. And yeah, it's been going great, and we're hoping to do a lot more cool content. I want to try to, my whole thing is to try to empower visual effects and visual effects artists, to know that they are awesome storytellers, like crazy cool people. And if people knew the kind of work that they were producing, they would really, appreciate those pixels that they're seeing on the screen. And so yeah, that's it. We're everywhere right now. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can find, just type in Legends of VFX and you should be able to find us.
Legends of VFX, definitely check it out. And where are other places people can find you and your work? Do you have a website?
Yeah, so right now, you can check, if you just go to bilalimack.com, you'll see a bunch of my work. You will see upcoming projects and films that I'm working on. I don't have like a blog or anything, but I think for me, it's kind of like my podcast is like my audio blog. And yeah, that's where you can find me. You can find me on LinkedIn, and my email and contact information is on bilalimack.com as well. I can send you that stuff as well if you like.
Sure. No, I'll put it on the podcast website. I don't know if people who are listening to it or watching it actually go and check the website, but it's worth doing because it's got a lot of cool stuff in it. Any person who wants to have show notes, especially in our field. I mean, I think it's so important to have an idea, like a visual in your head, to kind of keep in mind when we're talking about our craft, because it's so visual. I mean, it's literally what we do. Yeah. But I'm curious, beyond your personal interest in that subject and the things that the podcast forms, what made you think, first of all, choose the podcast format itself, and also just is there a part, like I mentioned, kind of as a side byproduct, it's a way to build a personal brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of the empowerment part as an artist, right? I think as an artist, you get to a point where, like, if you're a good artist, people are going to come to you for your brand and the kind of work you do. Right. And so the podcast helps serve as a way of people getting to know me and my personality and what I care about. And that's a good way to self-select if you want to work with me, or if you have same values on like storytelling, maybe it's not a good fit if you want to work on a project together. And the podcast, I feel like visual effects, for all the technology that we use and all of the innovation that happens, as far as an industry and like marketing ourselves and putting ourselves out there, we're like almost further behind than like plumbers and electricians. I don't know that many visual effects artists that are really good at selling themselves as a brand and, establishing themselves and putting content out. You have to like basically break a visual effects artist's arm to get them to do like some breakdowns to show the kind of work that they do. And it's very important to do that stuff as an artist. Yeah. Because as a visual effects artist, you're also, your brand is your equity. People will come to you. Like I said before, in the commercial space, you want to get to the point where your work is so good and great that people are coming looking for you to want to work with David.
Yeah, that stayed with me. The fact that you said, you've had clients who, as a flame artist and as a client-facing kind of person running the room, like you mentioned, having that privilege of having clients kind of come to you. I also had a conversation recently with a company about work as a visual effects supervisor, and they said it's very common now that supervisors come with clients. Like they bring, not only do they offer their services and get paid for the services that they introduce, bring on board, but they also bring value in the form of an existing client that they're bringing on board with them. Yeah.
Everybody now, I think you're going to need to have a little bit of a following if you want to be paid for with value, right? If you're like, yeah, I want to be a valuable artist and I want my company to treat me that with compensation and with respect and, and think of me more of a collaborator rather than just like a button pusher.
Right.
You have to bring that value by like having a following and establishing yourself with things like creating podcasts, showing the work that you've done, putting blogs out there, doing panels. I do a lot of panel talks. I like work with Autodesk a lot because I've used the software for a long time. And I set up a panel talk for them where we did talk about, storytelling and visual effects. We actually did that. And all that kind of stuff is really important for artists to be doing. Get involved in your industry and community. And for me, one of my things is for the visual effects industries, I hope that we get enough leverage at some point to realize how important the work we do is, Think of Avengers and all these films that are out there that they're making billions of dollars on. Visual effects studios closing left and right.
Right.
While these films are making billions and billions of dollars. I think we see ourselves so much as artists that we haven't worked to try to establish the equity part and like what we deserve as an industry. We don't even have a union.
Right.
We don't have anything to protect ourselves. And I think if you look at a list at probably the 20 highest earning films in the last 50 years or something, probably the top 10 are all heavy, like 80% visual effects film. Right. Every Avengers Marvel film, how could they do any of that stuff without visual effects? They couldn't. But visual effects probably get stiffed like on the bill at the end of the day for value and for compensation, probably worse than any other industry as far as I'm concerned. I read an article the other day about visual effects artists committed suicide.
Right. That was a big story.
I think it was the Mill or something film. And they killed themselves because it was such a terrible work condition.
Was it an artist or a producer? I think it was a VFX producer.
It was a producer. I think it was a producer or artist, whatever. Yeah. Somebody in our industry, how many people from Netflix do you think are jumping out of buildings from the jobs that they're working on? They have a lot of leverage, right. And they're capturing their value, and a lot of them they have a great way of capturing their value, and they've established themselves. But that's because I think Netflix has they got into the film business as a tech company. Yeah. And tech has leverage as far as an industry. So they're really a studio, but they're going about it as a tech. And so for me, I think part of the podcast and all this work I'm trying to do for visual effects industry is like trying to figure out how we can shift our mindset as storytellers rather than just just like people that are just work hands that are there just producing stuff. A great visual effects supervisor should be just as good as an incredible director. Right. Totally. You should but look at in our industry, what is the value of a great director versus a visual effects supervisor? Until those are kind of more equal in my mind, as far as specific on the kind of film you're doing, but like I think a great visual effects supervisor for a film like Avengers might be more important than the director in certain instances. Yeah. But
being a director, I mean, I as having been one for at least for one feature, I can say, and worked with a bunch of them. It's a very elusive like job description, and different directors do different things, and it's almost like this is you're the medium versus you're more the medium that connects all the things versus a thing itself in itself,
like a composer, more like
exactly. And some directors care about certain things and they're all about those things, and they completely kind of let other people take over whatever they're not interested in.
I think not just like overstep or anything as a visual effects supervisor, but I just feel like the value is a little lower for the kind of work that what is making the most money. And I don't want to sound like I'm like some angry VFX supervisor person. I've seen it and I've worked in it for a long time, and shifting from seeing people get taken advantage for a long time, and knowing when you actually have value, and seeing how the bottom rung of visual effects artists get taken advantage of, and they don't have leverage to be able to negotiate. And knowing how much money is being made,
right,
is what makes me frustrated. And so, I think obviously the director is like the CEO of a film, of course, but
yeah,
you need that CFO, you need all those guys to be just as important. And when the company is Salesforce is a marketing company, you have a CEO, but no one would say that, the value of marketing at a company like Salesforce is not that important,
right, of course,
because it's a marketing company. So if you're making a visual effects company, why would you not value the visual effects as much?
Yeah. And I think, that's a change that needs to happen for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
That might be, we'll see that the whole union thing and
yeah, I don't know. I think we might have missed the boat on the union thing. Unless people are really ready to put a lot on the line, you're
right.
You're gonna be hard pressed to get people to put their livelihood on stuff on the line and get blacklisted, because you literally would need everybody to get together. And it's starting. I know there are some small visual effects unions that are being established, and I think it might work a little bit like the way it's happened in the animation world, where if you are a big visual effects studio doing a lot of volume, you unionize company to company. I don't know if you're going to have you'll have local unions for the industry, like LA probably will have its own local visual effects union. This is New York, its own local visual effects union, and I think that's probably the way to approach it. But people have to be willing to put something on the line and for the greater good,
Yeah, and I think when you talk about missing the boat, it seems like because the trend is going towards visual effects as a gig economy versus centralized studio based.
Exactly.
Then
because you want to have leverage before, you wanted to start unionizing when you're making Jurassic Park,
right? Exactly.
That's the time to unionize. Nobody can do it. You've got all the control. If they want the fucking dinosaurs, they have to work and do what you need to do to get quality work and take care of your employees.
Yeah,
that's the time to unionize. After there's kids at home downloading After Effects and creating dinosaurs on their phones, that's not the time to unionize. You missed it.
I know. Well, there's a ton more that I would want to talk about you, and I had a pleasure, an absolute pleasure having this conversation, this long conversation that we had, but a good reason for it, because there's just so much to talk about. Man, I definitely have more questions, but I want to give you your rest of your evening and
yeah, man.
have
Thanks.
my wife hate me a bit less. And thank you so much for taking the time. And I hope that we do a follow-up at some point, because there's plenty more to discuss. But
sure, man. This was great. It's been a pleasure. This was a wonderful conversation. Thanks for having me.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you. And that was episode 31 of the Post podcast with Bilali Mack. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to leave a note, share it with your friends, or just keep enjoying it. And until next time, stay inspired.